I distinctly remember when I was a little kid going to the pool in Spring City where I grew up, and I would stare at that pool and I would stare at that water. I'd say this, I believe. I believe. I don't doubt. I'm going to do this. This time it's going to work, Jesus. I believe, I believe, I believe. And I would step onto that water and splash. I would sink every time. So I get back out. I must have doubted. I believe. I believe. I don't. Splash. Never could do it. Still haven't been able to pull this one off. You know, when we read our Bibles, we see some incredible things happen by faith. And we want to claim them, and we want to grow in our faith. And yet, even with that childlike faith, I said, Lord, I didn't doubt you, but it didn't happen. And it raises these questions in children's minds, but sometimes it raises these questions in our minds. Does faith really work? Can God really accomplish what he says he's going to do? And how does my faith, is faith like this magic that I can just do whatever I want if I believe enough? And that's some of what we have to wrestle through as we go through this series on faith and how we grow in our faith and how we walk by faith with the Lord. Because we don't want to be doubters. We don't want to be weak faith men and women, but we also don't want to presume that we're God and we can just control the world by whatever we think, right? A great evangelist and minister of the 1800s, his name was George Mueller. He lived between 1805 and 1898 in England. Incredible man of faith. He wrote an autobiography where he built entire orphanages and cared for literally over 10,000 orphans. He built over 117 schools. He educated over 120,000 children. And listen to this. He never asked for a dime. His whole ministry. He just prayed, and God funded the whole thing. And he did this exercise because he said, I want to show the church the power of faith. What God can do if we really trust him and believe in him. And his life, I encourage you to study, is littered with miracles. Literal, like they're in a boat and there's fog and they're going to have to pull over. He says, no, let me just pray. And the fog lifts and they just go. And then the captain gets converted in the moment. I mean, just incredible things happen because of this man of faith. And once I was reading one of his texts on faith, and he talked about the nature of faith. And I'm going to listen to a guy like this, all right? I'm going to listen to Jesus, but anyone in church history that does incredible things by faith, I want to hear. And he made a distinction. It helps me on the front end of this message before we drop into the text. He said, I like to distinguish between the grace of faith and the gift of faith. He said, the grace of faith is what we all have to have, and we don't have apart from the grace of God. That we're saved by grace through faith. That it comes to us, and we need faith to trust God for tomorrow and all the good things that he'll provide for us. And that's the faith that's commanded, and we got to have it. We got to walk by faith. But then he said in 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, there's this gift of faith. There's this gift of faith that comes to you where the will of God is placed in your soul. And God says to someone like Peter, come out into the water. And faith comes and says, this is the will of God. And the supernatural occurs. That the faith of God and the will of God converge in the gift of faith. And it accomplishes incredible things. And that's some of what Brian was wrestling with last week, about engaging God and seeking to discern his will. It wasn't God's will for me, Stephan, in Spring City to walk on water the way it was for Peter. So it's a little more complicated than just believing anything and everything. But in this passage, I think we discover 6 ways to grow in our faith and overcome doubt and seek to discern the will of God for our lives so that we can be great men and women of great faith. So we're going to discover 6 ways to grow in our faith and overcome doubt. The first is this. The way to grow in your faith and overcome doubt is to obey Jesus unconditionally. So if you're taking notes, the first point out of 6 is obey Jesus unconditionally. Look at verses 22 through 23. It says, immediately This is after he fed the 5,000. He sends them off on the boat. Look at this. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And after he dismissed the crowd, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. Notice the way that Matthew describes this in verse 22. Immediately, he made them get into the boat and go before him to the other side. Now, you and I have already know what's going to happen, right? They're going to get caught in a storm. If you didn't know, I'll describe it. We'll see it in a minute. They're going to get caught in the storm. The wind's going to be against them. They're going to be rowing. It's going to be hard. And they're trapped in this thing. And here's what I'm thinking. If I'm Matthew or Peter or all these guys, Jesus made me do this, right? He made me get into this boat. And he made me get in here, and he's not even in the boat with me, right? He stayed back to pray, dismiss the crowd, and here I am trapped in a storm. Why? Because Jesus made me do it. I'm here in this boat because of you, Jesus, right? I'm here because I listened to you, because I'm following you, because I trusted you. I obeyed you, and now I'm in a storm. The first thing, if you want to grow in your faith and overcome doubt, you need to believe that you're right where you are because you're following Jesus unconditionally. Because sometimes we pit these two things against one another, faith and obedience, as though they're different. Or sometimes somebody will say to me, I think the Lord wants me to do this, and it's completely contrary to his word. Jesus told me. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He has spoken to you through his word, and he doesn't speak to you contrary to his word. That faith and obedience go together. They're like two pedals on a bike. You push down on faith, and obedience comes up and wants to be pressed down, and that's how we move forward in the Christian life. As I was preparing this message, an old hymn I sung as a child came to my mind. Those of you who grew up singing hymns might remember it. It's called Trust and Obey. Remember that? When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. While we do his good will, he abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. The life of faith, the life of trusting Jesus starts with obeying Jesus. Jesus, you're Lord. And I trust you because I believe that you're right and what you have for me is right. And when you're in the storm, you want to know that Jesus has placed you there and not your foolish decisions, not your disobedience. So the first way to grow in faith and overcome doubt is to obey Jesus unconditionally. Secondly, the way to grow in your faith and overcome doubt is to look for Jesus in the storm. To look for Jesus in the storm, verses 24 and 25. Look at your Bibles. Verse 24. When he came to them, he was there alone, 24. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And listen, 25. In the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Whew. Picture that. The fourth watch of the night, by the way, is like 3 a.m., somewhere between 3 and 6 a.m. These guys have been rowing hard through the first watch, through the second watch, through the third watch, exhausted. John and Mark, who also record this, say that Jesus actually sees them while he's praying, rowing hard against. They're like being overcome. He's like, I better go out to these guys now. On the fourth watch of the night, Jesus shows up to deliver them. So remember our first point. They're there because Jesus has placed them there. Where has Jesus placed you? But here's the thing as believers sometimes, especially in American Christianity, we often think that if there's a storm, it's not Christianity, it's not faith, that God wants to bless you with your best life now. It's going to be easy if you come to him. He'll fix it all up. He'll make it easier. If your life is hard, then somehow you're out of whack. But that's not the way Jesus presents the Christian life. Jesus comes to you in the storm. Jesus doesn't promise you a storm-free life. He promised you that through the storm, your house is the house built on the firm foundation. Your house will stand even though everybody's going through the storms and their house falls, your house stands up. Why? Because you're on Jesus. Jesus meets you in the storm. And the way you overcome doubt and unbelief is you expect and anticipate the storm, and then you look for Jesus, and you wait for Jesus through the first watch and the second and the third, because Jesus will find you and come to you. Keep rowing. Jesus will come to you in the midst of the storm. The promise of the Christian life is not a storm-free life. It's a Jesus coming to you life. He's with you always, to the end of the world, even especially in the storm. Jesus comes to you. Look for Jesus in the storm. The eyes of faith says, Jesus, where are you? I need you. And holds on through the storm. Thirdly, the way that we overcome doubt and grow in our faith. Do not fear the unknown. Do not fear the unknown. Verses 26 and 27. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and they said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear, "Ah!" But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it's I. Do not be afraid." All sorts of questions come up in my mind when I read this. The first is, are there ghosts? Are these guys superstitious? Or is my Bible? I don't know. We'll put some agnostics. I don't know what's going on there. It's a ghost! But here's what happens. When we don't know something, when we don't know the future, tell me if this isn't true. Doesn't your mind immediately imagine the worst case scenario? Or like you come up with 5 worst case scenarios, like my kids will probably die. I mean, we have a lot of opportunity in this move to come up with a lot of worst case scenarios. We're not going to find a house we like. Our kids are going to go to a terrible school. They're going to probably end up getting drugs. Or you could just play it's going to be a horrible thing. The church is going to collapse. My preaching's going to stay. When we don't know something, fear and unbelief paints a picture and paints it as the worst possible thing. It's a ghost. It's a demon. It's got to kill me. I have a little pain. It's probably we fear. We look into the future not with faith. We don't expect to see Jesus there waiting for us. We expect to see a demon, a ghost, to come and take us out. We thought this was bad. It's about to get worse, right? That's not faith. That's unbelief. And we need to call that out, church. When our minds start racing and we think of the unknown, faith looks to the future and the promises of God. Faith looks to the future at the city that God is preparing for us, the room that Jesus is preparing for us. Faith says, even death can't kill me because Jesus has killed death. Faith looks to the future and says, even if I have cancer, Jesus has killed cancer. I'm going to be risen again. Faith says that I can go to the nations and spread the gospel. And even if I lose my life, it's the most glorious thing because I spread the word of Jesus. But I probably won't. But even if I do, it's okay because faith lays hold of the promises of God and runs forward and says, God, you're with me in the storm. You're going to meet me through the storm. I don't have a nickel or dime, but I'm going to build an orphanage by God, and I'm going to pray it into reality. And it's going to happen. And you know what happens? It happens. Sometimes people say, you don't really think you can do X, Y, Z. I do First Priority. We're on 221 schools. We just had one more school pop. We see thousands of students come to Christ every year. Thousands. Every week I'm in the school preaching the gospel, giving out Bibles. We ordered 6,000 Bibles to last for the year, and they were gone by Christmas. So we ordered 4,000 more. I go up to Philly. You can't do that. You can't go into the schools. Well, we're doing it. That'll never work up here. Not with that attitude, it won't. Right? Faith. Faith. Where is your faith? You of little faith. Why did you doubt? God can do so much more than we imagine or think, right? I can imagine a lot. Faith. Don't fear the unknown. Don't think of the worst case scenario. Faith looks to the future with hope. Fourthly, how do we grow in our faith and overcome doubt? We ask the Lord for confirmation. Ask the Lord for confirmation. Verse 28. And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come on to the water to come to you, on the water. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Now, my imagination goes with this one, too, because Peter's asking for a confirmation, isn't he? He's like, Lord, is it you? I thought it was a ghost, but if it's really you, here's how I want you to prove it. Tell me to come to you. Yes, come on out, boy. No. Sorry. I mean, Lord, if it's really you, what's my favorite color? What did we have for dinner last Thursday? I think it's bold faith for Peter just to ask for that as his confirmation. I mean, Peter gets a lot of flack for this, but listen, Matthew, who wrote this, is in the boat, and he's probably just shivering in his boots saying, it really is a ghost, Peter, shut up, you know? We're going to get through this, you know? Peter's the one that says, Lord, if it's you, here's how I want you to prove it. If this is you, Lord, prove it to me. You know, as I was meditating on this, my mind went to Gideon in Judges chapter 6. Do you remember this powerful story? Israel's a mess. They're worshiping false gods. It's a further and further descent. Even Gideon's not a great character overall to emulate, but he is a man of faith. And God calls him, he's like the least of his household, from the least of the tribe, and he says, I'm going to use you to deliver God's people. He's like, Lord, no way, this can't happen. All right, I'll try. He tears down the false altars and stuff. All of Israel gets mad at him for tearing down Baal's altar and all this stuff. But he just stands his ground, and God raises him up, and he says, all right, now go oppose the enemies that are persecuting God's people. You're going to win, Gideon. I'm going to be with you. And Gideon says, all right, Lord, you've been with me this far, but I just need some confirmation. I think I'm hearing clearly from you, but I'm going to put a fleece out. If you ever heard this, the fleece. He says, I'm going to put a fleece out at nighttime, and if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, I'll know it's you. Lord says, fair enough. Next morning, pulls up the fleece, wrings it out into a bowl, fills the bowl with water. The ground is completely dry. He says, Lord, don't let your anger be kindled against me. I just need it one more time, Lord, just to make sure. So he's, let me flip this around. If the fleece is dry and the ground is wet, all right, Lord, then I'll know it's you. I just need a second confirmation here, Lord. Fair enough. Lord's patient with us. Next morning, wakes up, fleece is completely dry. Ground is soaked with dew. All right, Lord, it's you. Boom, goes out. Victory. And that brings me encouragement, because what it says here is even when God tells you something, Lord, if this is you, before I jump headlong, before I believe, sploosh, right? I just need you to confirm a few things for me. And God is patient with that. God is patient with us, and he answers those confirmations. One of the things that's built complete faith for me and Sarah in this transition, I had a list of like 10 things I prayed for. I said, Lord, I'm happy here. I'll stay here. I'll serve you till you take me to glory here. But if you're calling me back to Philly, these things, I need all of them. Not like 9 of them, like all of them. I was picky, all right? This is what I think if it's you. And he answered all of them. At that point, my wife's freaking out. Lord, the Lord answered my prayer. I have to go. We have to go. This is God. Humanly speaking, this doesn't happen. The Lord has confirmed it. And so if you're unsure, before you dart headlong, Lord has told me this is faith, Ask him, Lord, if this is you. If this is you. Now, don't use that for unbelief. Don't use that if God has told you, or if it's clear in his word. Don't use that, Lord, if you don't want me to sin, then, have someone come knock on my door in 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going out to that party. Not that kind of conversation. You hear what I'm saying. But we ask, Lord, the Lord is faithful to confirm what he's called you to do. Ask for confirmation. Lord, if it's you, call me to come out of the boat. Fifthly, 6 ways to grow your faith and overcome doubt. The fifth way, get out of the boat. Get out of the boat. Verse 29, Jesus said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. This is where faith matters. This is where the rubber hits the road, right? It's one thing to say, I believe. It's another thing to get out of the boat. Could you imagine if Jesus had called you to do that, to feel every time you've stepped into water your whole life, sploosh, and you feel that wave, and it holds you up. And you take another step, and it holds you up. Faith sometimes is scary. If you're living your life like it's always you're playing it safe, that you can explain everything in natural human terms, then you're probably not living a big life of faith, because faith does take risks. Faith expects the supernatural, that your life is inexplicable unless this is true. Your friend should look at your life and say, his life makes no sense unless this is true, because I'm living for a different standard. And I'm not living by sight. I'm living by faith. Thought of that feeling, if you've ever gone rappelling down a mountain. Have you guys ever done that before? You harness up, and this is where you push off. And you ever done that before? Raise your hand if you've done that before. All right. This illustration stinks. No one knows what I'm talking about. The feeling for the 5 of you who've done this before, when you stick your butt over the edge of a cliff and your heart is beating out of your chest because everything in you screams and says, what are you doing? You're an idiot. People who stick their bodies over cliffs fall. And then all of a sudden, it holds you. That's the feeling of big faith that overcomes doubt. It goes over the cliff, that steps out of the boat and says, Jesus, I'm going to trust you in the storm. When the waves are all around me, when I'm already tired, I'm going to step out and come to you. What does it mean for you right now to hear the voice of Jesus and to get out of the boat? What is that step of faith that Jesus is calling you to take? To do great things for him, but fear and doubt, little faith, unbelief is holding you back. Jesus is calling you. The life of faith. Hears the voice of Christ, asks for confirmation, receives it, and then gets out of the boat. And the 6th and final way that we can grow in your faith and overcome doubt is to keep your eyes on the Lord. To keep your eyes on the Lord. Verses 30 through 33. But when he, Peter, saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me! And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. I'm sympathetic to Peter. I've already said that. Little faith. He just got out and walked on water, But here's the point. Peter was doing great when he had his eyes on Jesus. When he was, Lord, let me come to you. What notice from the text, what happened? Verse 30, when he saw the wind, he was afraid and was beginning to sink and cried out. You know what I find in my life? Even with this move, I'll bring that back in. I'm doing fine as long as my eyes are fixed on Jesus. The moment I look at the wind, I'm sunk. It's like, what about this? What about that? What about... They want us to fix what in our house? You guys just sold a house, You start, how are we going to find, what are we going to do? Do we have enough money for this? You start to stare at the wind instead of looking at Jesus. That's where faith diminishes. That's where the big faith shrinks and becomes little faith. That's when the courage becomes doubt. And so the final piece to this puzzle out of this text this morning, there's so much more that could be said about faith, but it's so clear that when we fix our eyes on Jesus, our faith grows and we overcome doubt. When we stare at the wind and the waves and the storm, we start to sink. But here's the good news. Even as you take those baby steps of faith, Jesus is there to lift you up, to pull you up. Because according to Hebrews, he's the author and the perfecter of your faith. Jesus is the one that gets it started, and Jesus is the one that will complete it, which is all the more why you need to not look at your faith. You need to look at Jesus. Because, church, there is one other twisted thing that we do with faith in the church. I call it faith in faith. You know what I'm talking about? You don't have enough faith. You got to look inward more. You got to find the resources. It's this hyper introspection that says, I need to muster something from within me. But biblical faith looks up and out. Biblical faith looks to Jesus, and he gives you the faith that you need. The faith you need comes from the Son of God. Truly, he is the Son of God. And the only reason we'll walk on any water is because he walked on it first. So wherever you are in your faith, maybe you're a doubter with little faith, but you have it. But I believe there are some here, even this morning, as I preach this message, you just need to start the life of faith. Because the Christian life of faith is from A to Z by faith, but you have to get started. You don't need just the gift of faith, meaning to do the supernatural. You just need the grace of faith to be saved. And here's the good news. Jesus gives that to you by his grace as well. And so I want to close with a prayer for faith, and we all need it. And I want to pray for all of us. So let's bow our heads and close our eyes.